It's a funny thing, getting older. You think you finally earned your peace. You've been a wife, a mother, a nurse. You've been everything to everyone. You finally settle into a quiet life, thinking you know exactly who you are. And then the phone rings, and you're called to be something new all over again. My story is about that. It's about a call that forced me to find a strength I thought I was done using. It's a journey that, in many ways, was about coming back to myself, to the core of who I am. Speaking of that, I wanted to share a book that fits this feeling perfectly. It's called Coming Back to Myself, 60 Liberating Truths to Find Yourself Again. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. It's a wonderful guide for anyone who feels like they're being pulled in a new direction and needs to find their footing again. My story begins with the call that started it all. And before we get into it, if you enjoy stories like this, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. I rescued my 16-year-old granddaughter from a shelter. She was broken, scared, and alone. She didn't ask for any of this, but I was the only one left who could save her. The phone call that changed my life didn't come with a warning. It was just a regular Tuesday afternoon. I was in my kitchen in Santa Monica, wiping down the counters. It's a small place, just a little bungalow, but it's mine. Lord knows I worked hard enough for it. People hear California and think of movie stars in Beverly Hills. My life has been anything but glamorous. It's been a life of double shifts, mending clothes, and stretching $1 until it screamed. The phone rang, and it was a woman with a tired, professional voice. She said she was a social worker from the county. "Are you Christine Blacklock?" she asked. "I am." "Are you the paternal grandmother of a Stephanie Blacklock?" My heart just stopped. I gripped the edge of the counter. I hadn't heard that name in connection with my own in years. Not since my son, Robert, had drifted out of our lives again. "Yes," I said. "Is she all right?" "Ma'am," the woman said, and I could hear papers rustling. "Stephanie is currently in a county shelter. She's 16. A shelter. Not foster care, not a group home, but a shelter. The word hung in the air, cold and hard. This was a new low, even for Robert, my son, the source of a pain so old and deep I'd learned to live with it, like a bad joint that aches every time it rains. The social worker kept talking, giving me details, but my mind was already spinning backward. I saw Robert as a little boy, always too angry, always pushing back, even when I was just trying to help. He had a rough start, it's true. But when does a rough start stop being an excuse and start just being, well, who you are? I'm 77 years old. I've earned my peace. I've raised my child, buried my husband, and worked my fingers to the bone as a nurse for 45 years. I thought this was my time to sit on the porch, read my books, and just be. But the past doesn't care about what you've earned. It just shows up. Robert had been a storm his whole life. And like any big storm, he left a trail of wreckage. He'd get into trouble, I'd bail him out. He'd lose a job, I'd lend him money I didn't have. Then he met a girl, they had Stephanie, and for a foolish minute, I let myself hope. I thought maybe a child would anchor him, make him see beyond himself. I was wrong. It didn't anchor him. It drowned him. He couldn't handle the responsibility. He ran. He and Stephanie's mother had a terrible time of it, and my granddaughter, my poor granddaughter, was caught in the middle. In and out of foster care her whole life, and now a shelter. "Mrs. Blacklock," the social worker's voice snapped me back. "I'm here," I said. My voice was quiet, but my hands were shaking. All that old hurt, That disappointment in my son, it was all bubbling up again. But underneath it all, something else was forming. Something hard and clear. "What's the address of the shelter?" I asked, grabbing a pen and the back of an envelope. "I'll be there in an hour." She gave me the address, and I thanked her and hung up the phone. I stood there for a long time in my quiet kitchen. I looked at the little potted geranium on my windowsill. I'd spent so many years cleaning up Robert's messes. I was tired. My bones ached. I didn't know if I had this in me. But what was the alternative? To leave that child, my blood, in a place like that? No, not while I was still breathing. Robert had made his choices. Now I had to make mine. I grabbed my purse and my car keys. I didn't know what I was walking into. I hadn't seen Stephanie since she was a little girl. She was a 16-year-old stranger now. A stranger who was my granddaughter. I just prayed I wasn't too late.
As I drove, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The address the social worker gave me was in a part of town I hadn't been to in years. My little bungalow in Santa Monica, with its sea breeze and quiet neighbors, felt like it was on another planet. My mind just couldn't stay on the road. It kept going back to the day Stephanie was born, 16 years ago. I remember the smell of the hospital, that clean, sharp scent of antiseptic that I knew so well from my years as a nurse. I was so excited. I was finally a grandmother. I'd knitted a little yellow set, a cap, and booties. I held her, and she was just so perfect, so tiny. But even in that room, with that beautiful new baby, the shadow was there. The shadow was my son, Robert. He was in the hallway, not looking at his new daughter, but pacing. I remember peeking out and seeing him on his phone, his voice low and angry. It was probably about money. With Robert, it was always about money. He was 39 years old then, plenty old enough to be a father, but he looked like a trapped boy. He'd had problems for a long time. It started in high school. And I told myself it was just kids being kids. But it wasn't. By the time Stephanie was born, Robert was deep into pills. It made him unreliable. No, that's too soft a word. It made him selfish. It made him mean. And Stephanie's mother? Poor thing. She really did try. She was a young girl who thought that loving Robert would be enough to save him. But love doesn't fix an addiction. It just gives the addiction one more thing to break. For the first few years, they were in and out of each other's lives. I'd get these awful panicked phone calls. "Christine, Robert's gone again. Christine, there's no food in the house. He took the last of the money." I'd drive over with bags of groceries. I'd pay an electric bill just to keep the lights on for the baby. I was trying to patch a dam that was already crumbling. I tried to intervene. I begged Robert to go to rehab. I offered to let them both move in with me on the one condition that he got clean. He wouldn't hear it. He'd just start yelling, telling me I was trying to control him, that I thought I was better than him. He never wanted my help. He just wanted my cash. Back then, I was still working part-time at the hospital in Los Angeles. I was busy. I had my own life, my own bills to pay after my husband passed. And if I'm being honest, I was scared. I was scared of my own son. And I was scared of what it would really mean to step in. It would have meant a fight, a real legal fight for custody. I was in my 60s. I was tired. I told myself I was doing all I could. But I wasn't. Eventually, Stephanie's mother just broke. She couldn't do it anymore. Robert was long gone, and she gave up. That's when the state stepped in. That's when Stephanie first went into foster care. She was 5. I'd call the social workers. I'd try to see her. But the system is a machine. They'd move her from one home to another. Robert's name was still on the paperwork, and it just made everything complicated. I let it be complicated. It was my excuse. The car rolled to a stop in front of the shelter. It was a square concrete building with windows that looked more like slits. All my old excuses, all my fears about being too old or too tired, they just felt so cheap. I had let my son's darkness ruin this child's life. I turned off the engine and sat there in the heavy silence. I wasn't a nurse anymore. I wasn't a wife. I was just a 77-year-old woman. But I was the only one she had. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and got out of the car. I couldn't stand by anymore. Not this time.
The lobby of the shelter smelled like bleach and sadness. It was a cold, official-feeling place, and I felt so out of place in my good slacks and cardigan. I walked up to the front desk, a thick pane of glass separating me from the woman on the other side. "I'm Christine Blaylock," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm here to see Stephanie Blaylock. A social worker called me." The woman looked at her computer, typed a few things, and then picked up a phone. She mumbled something into it and told me to take a seat. I sat on a hard plastic chair. Every minute felt like an hour. I was about to see my granddaughter, a girl I only knew from a few faded photographs. What would I even say to her? Then a door buzzed open and a teenager walked out, followed by the social worker I'd spoken to. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the little girl with pigtails I remembered. This was a young woman. She was tall, thin as a rail, and she held herself with a kind of protective stiffness, her arms crossed over her chest. Her hair was stringy, and her eyes, they were hollow. They were the eyes of someone who had seen way too much and expected nothing good from anyone. She looked at me with a blank, guarded expression. No recognition. No nothing. "Stephanie," the social worker said gently, "this is your grandmother, Christine." Stephanie just stared. She didn't say hello. She didn't move. "Hello, Stephanie," I said. I tried to smile, but my face felt stiff. It's been a long time." We sat down in a small, windowless meeting room. The social worker explained the situation. Stephanie had been in a foster home, but there was an incident. She'd been at the shelter for 3 days. Robert, as I expected, was nowhere to be found. His parental rights were close to being terminated anyway. I looked at this child sitting across from me. She was 16 years old and had already lived a lifetime of neglect. She was my son's daughter. She was my husband's granddaughter. My husband, Frank, he was such a good man, steady, kind. He was the one who always knew what to do. Frank would have never let this happen. He would have stepped in years ago. He always used to tell me, "Christine, you can't fix Robert, but you can't let him break everything else around him." I spent so many years trying to fix Robert, trying to make him into the man I wanted him to be. But Frank was right. I couldn't fix him. And while I was busy failing at that, this girl had been left to fall through the cracks. I thought about my own upbringing. My mother was a tough woman. She raised me on her own and taught me that you don't run from your responsibilities. You face them, even when they're hard, even when they're not your fault. I looked at Stephanie, who was picking at a loose thread on her jeans, avoiding my eyes. I was 77 years old. I had a small pension. My back hurt every morning. Taking in a teenager with this much trauma, was not part of my plan. It would mean giving up my quiet life. It would mean social workers and high school and moods I couldn't possibly understand. It would be a huge sacrifice. But then I looked at her again, and I didn't see a stranger. I saw my blood. What happens now? I asked the social worker. Well, she said, we'll have to find another placement for her, another foster home. No, I said. The word was out of my mouth before I had even fully thought it through. Both Stephanie and the social worker looked at me. Stephanie's head actually lifted, her eyes showing the first flicker of something. Surprise, maybe? No, I said again, this time with more strength. She's not going to another stranger's home. She's coming with me. The social worker looked surprised. Miss Blaylock, that's a very big commitment. We'd have to start the process for legal guardianship. There are background checks, home studies. Then let's start it. Whatever it takes, I'm not leaving her here. I knew it would be hard. I knew I was probably too old for this. I knew that Robert's shadow would always be there, but there was no way I could walk out of that building and leave that child behind. I had failed her once by not fighting for her sooner. I wasn't going to fail her again. It took a few days of paperwork and what felt like 100 questions, but they finally released Stephanie into my care as a temporary guardian. The drive back to my little house in Santa Monica was the quietest car ride I've ever been in. I tried to make small talk. "It's a nice day out," I said. "The breeze from the ocean is lovely this time of year." She just stared out the passenger window, her arms crossed tight. She didn't nod, didn't make a sound. She was like a tightly coiled spring, and I was afraid one wrong word would make her snap. I finally just turned on the radio, soft oldies, and we drove in silence. I pulled into the driveway of my bungalow. It's a tiny place, just 2 bedrooms, but I've kept it nice. I have a little garden in the front with roses. It's my home. "Well, here we are," I said, trying to sound cheerful. She got out of the car, pulling a single, worn-out backpack with her. That was all she had in the world. She looked at my house, and her expression didn't change. I couldn't tell if she was disappointed or scared. People hear Santa Monica, and they think of big beachfront houses. My house is small, cozy, and a good mile from the water. It's a far cry from the glamorous image of California. I opened the door. "It's not much," I said, "but it's clean and it's safe." I showed her to the spare bedroom. It used to be Robert's room long ago. I'd cleaned it top to bottom. I'd bought a new comforter, a simple floral one, and put fresh towels on the dresser. "This will be your room," I told her. "The bathroom is just across the hall." She walked in, dropped her backpack on the floor, and just stood in the middle of the room. She didn't look at the bed. She didn't look at anything. I'll be in the kitchen starting dinner," I said, my voice trailing off. I closed the door quietly behind me. Those first few weeks were, I think, the hardest of my life. Harder than nursing school, harder than losing my husband. My life, which had been so quiet and orderly, was turned upside down. But the hardest part was the silence. Stephanie was a ghost in my house. She'd stay in her room. I'd call her for dinner, and she'd come out, sit at the table, and eat without a word. She'd pick at her food, her eyes locked on her plate. After, she'd mumble, "Can I be excused?" and disappear back into her room. She was so emotionally distant, and I couldn't blame her. Every adult in her life, starting with my son, had failed her. Why would I be any different? She was just waiting for me to disappoint her. I'd lie in bed at night, my heart just aching. How do you break through a wall that high? I had no idea how to raise a teenager in this day and age, let alone one who'd been through so much. So I fell back on the only thing I knew. I fell back on my old nurse's training, patience and routine. I didn't push. I didn't crowd her with questions about her past or her feelings. I knew she was wounded, and you can't force a wound to heal. You just have to keep it clean and give it time. So I kept things simple. I got up at the same time every morning. I made breakfast at 7:30 sharp. I'd knock on her door. "Stephanie, breakfast is on the table." Sometimes she came, sometimes she didn't, but I always made her a plate. I'd talk, even if she didn't answer. I'd tell her about the birds and the garden or what I was planning to make for dinner, just filling the silence, letting her hear a calm voice. One night, about a month in, I made my special meatloaf. It was Frank's favorite. I set the table, and she came out and sat down. She ate a few bites, and then she just stopped. "You don't like it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She shrugged. "It's okay if you don't. I can make you a sandwich." She looked up at me, and her eyes were just so old. She said, "Nobody's ever made me meatloaf." Her voice barely a whisper. My heart just broke. I just nodded. "Well," I said, "I make it every Tuesday." I didn't push it. I just cleared the plates. But later that night, I heard her in the kitchen. I peeked around the corner, and she was at the counter cutting herself another bigger slice. She ate it standing right there. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My old school ways, the steady routine, the quiet care, it was the only medicine I had, and I prayed it would be enough to start healing that broken spirit of hers. We had been settling into a routine for a few months. It was a quiet life. I'd get Stephanie up for school, and she'd actually be at the breakfast table when I came in with the coffee. She still didn't talk a lot about her past. I'd never pushed, but she was present. She'd do her homework at the kitchen table while I made dinner. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me, just watching, like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. The hollow look in her eyes was starting to fade. She was starting to look like a 16-year-old. I'd finally let myself believe we were gonna be okay, that this fragile little life we were building was real. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the past came knocking. I heard the sound first. Not a polite knock, but a heavy, impatient banging on the front door. My heart jumped into my throat. Stephanie was still at school. She had an after-school club or something. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. My blood turned to ice. It was Robert. I hadn't seen my son in at least 2 years, not since he'd called me from a payphone asking for money, which I didn't send. He was in his 50s now, but he looked so much older. His face was puffy and red, his hair was thin and greasy, and he was wearing a stained jacket that looked like he'd slept in it. He looked bad. He looked just like he always did when he was in trouble. I opened the door, but I kept the chain on. "Robert?" "Ma," he said, trying to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Come on, let me in. It's cold out here." "What do you want, Robert?" My voice was flat. I was so tired of this. "What do I want? You're my son. I need help. I'm in a jam. I just need a place to stay for a few nights, just to get on my feet." It was the same line, the same one he'd used since he was 20. Just to get on my feet. It was a lie then, and it was a lie now. A part of me, that stupid mother's heart, just ached. He was my child, and he was a mess. He was sick. But then I thought of the girl in the spare bedroom. I thought of the nightmares I'd heard her have. I thought of the food I'd seen her hoard in her room that first month, just in case. "You can't stay here," I said. His face hardened. "What do you mean I can't stay here? This is my house, too." "No, it's not. Not anymore. She's here, Robert." He squinted, confused. "She? Who?" "Stephanie, your daughter. She lives with me. I'm her legal guardian." He was quiet for a second, processing. I watched his eyes. He wasn't thinking, my daughter, is she okay? He was thinking, how does this affect me? So, he finally said, she's my kid. Even better. We can be a family. You can help both of us. A family? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. You haven't been her father. You've been her disaster. You're the reason she was in a shelter. That wasn't my fault, he snapped, and the old familiar anger flared up. It was her mother. It was the system. It was you. You were never there for me. He blamed everyone. His ex-wife, me, the world. It was never, ever his fault. He was selfish down to his bones. I looked at the clock on the wall. Stephanie was due home in an hour. The thought of her walking up to this, of him being here, it was like a physical jolt. My old conflict, wanting to save my son, but knowing I couldn't, was gone. It wasn't a conflict anymore. It was a choice, and it was clear. No, I said, and my voice was firm. I am not going to let you disrupt her life. She is finally safe. She is finally starting to heal. I will not let you walk in here and poison this place for her. Poison? He yelled, rattling the doorknob. You're my son. You're just going to turn me away? Yes, I said. I am. You're a 55-year-old man, Robert. I can't save you, but I can save her, and I will. I closed the door, ignoring his shouts. I walked into the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold a glass of water. I had finally done it. I had chosen her over him. It felt like the hardest and the easiest decision of my life. I just had to pray he wouldn't be on the porch when she got home.
Robert never came back. After I closed the door on him, I spent a week jumping at every noise, terrified he'd show up when Stephanie was alone. But he just vanished. As he always did. The only difference was, this time, I felt a sense of relief instead of guilt. My choice was made. It's funny how a year can feel like a lifetime. The quiet, tense house Stephanie first walked into was gone. In its place was a home. Our home. The girl who used to hide in her room now sat at the kitchen table every evening, her books spread out. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable. Sometimes we'd talk for hours, and sometimes we'd just sit, me reading my book, her doing her schoolwork. She'd made huge strides. At first, school was hard. She was so far behind, but the girl was smart. And more than smart, she was determined. It was like a fire had been lit inside her. She didn't just want to catch up. She wanted to get ahead. She made a couple of friends, quiet girls like her. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and heard them laughing in her room, actually laughing. I had to stop in the hallway and just close my eyes, letting that sound wash over me. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. About 6 months after she moved in, she came to me with a permission slip. I want to volunteer, she said, not quite meeting my eye, trying to keep my voice casual. Why the hospital? She shrugged, but then she looked right at me. I want to be around people who fix things, people who make things better. So she started. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, she'd put on her little volunteer smock and go to the hospital. She'd restock supplies, deliver flowers, and help the nurses with simple tasks. I watched her change. It was like watching a flower that you thought was dead suddenly start to bloom. The love and patience, that steady routine I'd built, it was working. She was starting to trust. She was starting to heal from all that trauma. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to live. My pride in her was a physical ache in my chest. One evening, about a year after she'd first arrived, I found her at the kitchen table long after dinner. It was almost 11 o'clock. She wasn't doing homework. She had a thick, heavy book open. It looked like one of my old college anatomy textbooks I'd kept in the attic. "Stephanie, honey, it's late," I said. "You should get some sleep." She looked up, and her eyes weren't tired. They were electric. "Grandma," she said, "look at this." She pointed to a complicated diagram of the human heart. "Do you know how it all works? How it's all connected? It's perfect." I sat down across from her. "You really like this stuff, don't you?" "I love it," she said, and her voice was filled with a passion I'd never heard from her before. At the hospital, I watched the doctors, especially in the ER. It's chaos. People come in and they're broken, and everything is scary. And then the doctors, they take charge. They know what to do. They take all that chaos and they fix it. She took a deep breath. "I want to do that. I want to be a doctor, a trauma surgeon." I just stared at her. This girl who had been the picture of chaos and trauma herself, she wanted to run right back into the fire. But this time, she wanted to be the one putting it out. "That's a long road, Stephanie," I said gently. "A lot of school, a lot of hard work." "I don't care," she said, her chin set with that same determination I'd seen her apply to her schoolwork. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I want to be the person who steps in when everything is falling apart." I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. I couldn't speak for a moment. This strong, confident, capable young woman, it was hard to even remember the scared, silent teenager I'd picked up from that shelter. She had taken all the pain from her past, all the neglect from my son, and was turning it into fuel. She wasn't just healing, she was becoming powerful.
The years pass, as they always do. They blurred together in a flurry of high school graduation, college applications, and then medical school. Stephanie kept her word. She worked harder than anyone I'd ever known. She moved away for school, but she called me every Sunday. I watched her go from a determined girl to a focused woman. 18 years went by in what felt like a heartbeat. My granddaughter, the one I'd picked up from a shelter, was now Dr. Stephanie Blaylock, a trauma surgeon. She was 34 years old, and my pride in her was the single biggest thing in my life. I was 95 years old. My bones ached more and I moved a lot slower, but I was still in my little house, and I was happy. Then, just like it began, it all changed with a phone call. It was late. After 10 p.m., I was already in my nightgown. The phone rang and I picked it up, worried it was Stephanie calling so late. "Mrs. Blaylock?" a young woman's voice asked. It was crisp, official. "Yes?" "This is UCLA Medical Center. We have a patient here, a Robert Blaylock. He listed you as his emergency contact. He's been in a severe car accident." My heart, that old, tired muscle, just seized. "Robert, after all this time? Is he alive?" "He is in critical condition, ma'am. He's being prepped for emergency surgery right now. Can you come to the hospital?" I got a taxi. My hands were shaking so much I could barely lock my front door. All those feelings I'd had from my son, the anger, the disappointment, they were all gone. All I felt was that old, stupid primal fear. He's my child. He's hurt. I got to the ER. It was bright, loud, and smelled of antiseptic, just as I remembered. A nurse directed me to the surgical waiting area. I was sitting there, wringing my hands, when a team of doctors and nurses came rushing through the double doors, pushing a gurney. The man on it was a mess, bloody, hooked up to a dozen machines. It was Robert. I stood up, my hand flying to my mouth. "Wait!" I called out. The team paused, and the lead surgeon turned around. She was in blue scrubs, a mask covering her face, a cap on her head, but I'd know those eyes anywhere. It was Stephanie. She stopped dead. Her eyes locked on mine, then darted to the man on the gurney, then back to me. I could see the shock in her eyes, the sudden, terrible understanding. The nurse next to her said, "Dr. Blaylock, we have to go. He's crashing." Stephanie didn't move for a second. It felt like the whole world stopped. I saw a lifetime of conflict flash across her face. This wasn't just a patient. This was the man who had abandoned her, the father who had left her in shelters, who had never once called, never once asked if she was okay. This was the man whose failures had defined her entire childhood. And now his life was in her hands. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to tell her, "It's okay, you don't have to do this." I saw her internal battle, the wounded child versus the doctor she'd worked so hard to become. Then she blinked. The conflict was gone. The doctor took over. "Get him to OR3 now," she commanded, her voice firm, professional. She didn't look at me again. She turned and ran with the gurney, shouting orders about blood types and internal bleeding. I was left alone in the hallway, my body trembling. I was proud. Oh, Lord, I was proud. I thought my heart would burst, but I was also terrified. I sank back into the waiting room chair, my mind a mess. My son was dying, and my granddaughter, the child he broke, was now the only one who could save him.
I don't know how long I sat in that plastic chair. The clock on the wall seemed to have stopped. Nurses walked by, the PA system crackled with codes, but all I could do was stare at the double doors Stephanie had disappeared through. I prayed. I prayed for my son's life, and I prayed for my granddaughter's strength. It was almost 3 a.m. when the doors finally opened again. Stephanie walked out, pulling the cap off her hair. She looked exhausted, down to the bone. She saw me and walked over, her face a mask of professional calm, but her eyes held the weight of the last 18 years. She sat down next to me, not touching me, just staring straight ahead for a moment. "He's alive," she said. Her voice was flat. It was complicated. A lot of internal damage, but he's stable. He's in recovery. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. "Thank you," I whispered. "Oh, Stephanie, thank you." She finally turned to look at me. "I didn't do it for him, Grandma," she said quietly. "I didn't even do it for you. I did it because it's my job. I did it because that's who you taught me to be. You taught me to be the person who fixes things, remember?" I just nodded, tears rolling down my old wrinkled cheeks. I couldn't speak. I just reached out and put my hand over hers. She squeezed it. Robert survived. He spent weeks in that hospital. Stephanie never went to his room. She'd check his chart, get updates from the other doctors, but she never went to see him. I went. I sat by his bed. He looked old and broken. When he was finally awake and aware, we talked. But there was no grand change. There was no movie moment where he apologized for everything, for the neglect, for the pain he had caused. He was just Robert. He was quiet and he was grumpy. And when he was well enough to be discharged to a long-term care facility, he just went. His relationship with Stephanie is still just a fact. He's her biological father and she's the surgeon who saved his life. But it's strained. There's too much water under that bridge, too much pain. She saved his life, but she couldn't fix his. I sit in my little house in Santa Monica now, and I think about the whole long journey. I'm 95, and I've seen so much. I've come to understand that my role was never to save my son. I couldn't. My role was to save his daughter.
My job was to provide a safe, loving home, to give her the one thing she never had, a foundation, a place to stand so she could build her own life. And she did. Oh, Lord, did she ever. Her future is in her hands, not Robert's. She took a legacy of pain and addiction and turned it into a life of purpose and healing. She broke the cycle. Sometimes I look at the new picture she sent me, her standing in her white coat smiling, and I wonder if, in a different world, Robert could have been the father he never was. If he could have been a man she could be proud of, instead of a man she just had to save. But I'll never have the answer to that. This has been my story. It's been a hard one, but it's been a good one too. It makes you think about family and forgiveness and the choices we make. So, I want to ask you all, do you think Robert will ever redeem himself, or is it too late? And what role does forgiveness really play in family healing? Thank you for listening to me. If my story touched you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Please leave your thoughts on those questions in the comments below. I'd truly love to read what you think. And of course, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more stories like this one. It means the world to know you're out there. Lastly, remember to download this wonderful book called Coming Back to Myself, 60 Liberating Truths to Find Yourself Again. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before on Her Kindle Stories. Thank you.